Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Margie McHugh, Director of the Migration Policy Institute's National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy, and it's a real pleasure to welcome all of you to this webinar, How Are School Systems Responding to the Needs of Immigrants, Refugees, and Unaccompanied Minors? I want to say truly a warm welcome to all of you. It's very inspiring to see the list of all of you who signed up for this webinar. We've got folks from all across the country working in schools, local and state education agencies, immigrant and refugee community groups, and the like. And I just want to say that we really appreciate all the work that all of you are doing on the front lines, trying to improve services and responses for these kids, and that we're just excited to be sharing this piece of work with you. I'll just say a few things about basic housekeeping before we get started. You can see there on the screen that, yes, it'll be fairly easy for you to get slides and audios from today's webinar if you go to our website, www.migrationpolicy.org/events. If you have any problems sort of working with the webinar platform today, please use that email you see on the screen, events@migrationpolicy.org. We also have someone monitoring that phone number you see, 202-266-1929. So feel free if you have any issues with being connected with this today. Also, we'd love it if you would use that Q&A chat function on the right of the screen throughout the webinar. We really like to get questions in advance so we can sort of mix and match and combine and, kind of be ready when we get to the Q&A portion. So please, if you can, write in early with your questions. You can also send them, as you see there, to events@migrationpolicy.org, or you can tweet questions to us at Migration Policy or #MPI-discuss. So with that, again, I'm Margie McHugh. I'll be moderating today. You'll also be hearing from Julie Sugarman, who's a policy analyst with our center. She's the author of the report that we're releasing today. And then we have two additional speakers that we're just so happy are able to join us. They represent two very different and excellent examples of thoughtful system designs and practices for working with older immigrant and refugee students. Nicole Mitchell, who's with the Los Angeles Unified School District, where she coordinates their school enrollment, placement, and assessment center, and Marguerite Lukes, who's the Director of Research and Innovation for the International's Network of Public Schools. I'd just say very, very briefly that for those of you who, if you're not familiar with the range of our work, we're here within the larger Migration Policy Institute. We have a very deep focus, I guess you'd say, on the education pipeline, looking at early childhood, K-12, adult ed, and workforce development systems and how they're supporting the long-term integration success of immigrants and their children. We also have historically done a great deal of work around language access issues across the range of government agencies, and also a focus on the governance of integration policy, particularly trying to have the federal government kind of build its brain circuitry for thinking about how it could be doing a better job of organizing itself to address integration issues. Specifically on English learner and immigrant students, I just want to point out for any of you who maybe haven't been to our website recently or been following our work for a long time, for many years, we've had an interest in educational success for first and second generation immigrant and English learner students. If you go to our website, migrationpolicy.org/integration, you'll see there's a bunch of tabs for the various areas that we work in. You'll be able to find a lot of different field research products, data and policy analysis. Right now, we also are very pleased to have been able to be working with about 7 different states in a TA partnership around ESSA implementation. So I just say that there are a lot of different inputs, I guess, into our work, and hopefully you'll find that plus an ELL information center that we have up on our website of use to you in your efforts. Specifically regarding secondary school newcomers, part of why we're where we are at today is that we were getting quite a few additional requests since early 2014 for information, technical assistance, data, and the like related to late arriving, we say, meaning kids who are arriving further on in their education careers, particularly middle and high school age children, about how schools could do a better job of meeting the comprehensive needs of these young people. Lots of worries about the lost potential to be serving them because they've the feeling that a lot of school districts felt like they were slipping through their fingers, and also that districts really realized that they needed to build partnerships if they were going to be able to meet the full range of needs that a lot of these late arriving kids come in with. So we were really pleased to have the support to create a learning network on Newcomer Youth Success. We've had about 35 local sites participating in it, with the center of gravity being folks who are working within school districts. It's simply been a private learning network to connect these administrators and practitioners in other related fields around this question of how to improve services for immigrant and refugee newcomers. We've worked with them mainly via a private website, via blog posts, serving lots of resources, conducting webinars and the like, and have been trying to think sort of side by side with them about what are a lot of the policy implications of the challenges that they're facing. So that's a little bit what has led us to, and it's certainly what's informed the report that we're releasing today. The report takes a look at a lot of what we've seen by working with these various school districts. As you'll hear in a moment from Julie, we think that the report is a very useful update of earlier research related to newcomer students, with a close look at how school districts have been looking at their enrollment and sort of front-end student reception practices, how to provide some of the comprehensive support that many of these late arriving students may need, and also what are some of the instructional designs that best meet the needs of these youth. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Julie Sugarman. She's a policy analyst here at the Migration Policy Institute Center on Immigrant Integration Policy. She's focused broadly on issues related to immigrant and English learner student success, and just excited to have her be able to showcase some of this work that she's put together. Julie, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Margie, and hi, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here with you today and discussing this really interesting work. Like Margie, I want to thank you all for your work and thank the folks in the Learning Network who were just so forthcoming with their practices and their opportunities and challenges in order to be able to share those with you. So I wanted to start, as we often do at MPI, with some information about the size of the newcomer population. We're first going to look at some Census Bureau data on young people who self-identify or are identified by their parents as speaking English less than very well, which is how MPI defines the limited English proficient population. Census data tend to have lower counts of LEP youth compared to the counts of English learners done by the U.S. Department of Education, but this data is useful because it really allows us to do some comparisons that school data can't provide. So this graph shows the number of LEP students who were foreign-born in the blue-green and students who are U.S.-born in orange. The left column shows that only 18% of elementary students were foreign-born, and the middle column shows that among 6th through 12th graders, the share is a little higher at 42%. So you can see by the size of the orange segments of those columns that most LEP students were born in the U.S., and therefore they're U.S. citizens. Another thing we wanted to know was roughly how many young people arrive in the U.S. each year who could potentially enroll in secondary school. Again, we're looking at limited English proficient youth, and for this calculation, we looked at average annual arrivals across a period of 5 years so that we could provide a more reliable estimate than just a single-year count. So during that time period, each year, there were about 154,000 LEP youth in the broader 12 to 21 age range who came to the U.S., and about a third of them were in the typical high school age range of 14 to 17. This data comes from the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is the agency tasked with caring for unaccompanied immigrant children. You can see here that 2014 and 2016 were the 2 years with exceptionally high numbers of young people who were apprehended at the southern U.S. border and then released to sponsors, who are usually family members. Overall, in this 2014 to 2017 time period, over 175,000 unaccompanied children were released to sponsors throughout the country. And finally, this slide shows that there were about 70,000 refugee arrivals in 2014 and 2015, with a modest increase to almost 85,000 in 2016. In 2015, which is the latest year we have data for, just over 14,000 of those refugees were young people between the ages of 10 and 19. Before getting into the findings of the study, I wanted to say a few words of context about what schools and communities were experiencing in this time frame of roughly 2014 to 2016. Although the U.S. didn't have the dramatic numbers of refugees arriving that Europe saw around that same time period, some communities experienced a relatively dramatic increase in the arrival of young people than they had typically seen, and there was also quite a bit of media attention to the Central American unaccompanied children and to Syrian refugees. The unaccompanied child population was also noteworthy because of their characteristics. They were mostly teenagers, many had interrupted or limited formal schooling, many spoke indigenous languages and did not speak Spanish very well or at all, many experienced considerable stress and trauma in their home country and on their migration journey, and then had further issues once they arrived here in terms of working through family reunification and legal issues. And of course, toward the end of this period and into 2017, there was the election, which brought additional stresses and uncertainties around immigration issues. At the same time, there was a convergence of some important issues in education. The federal education law known as the Every Student Succeeds Act was passed in 2015, and it really raised the profile of how schools, districts, and states would be held accountable for demonstrating that ELs make sufficient progress in English language proficiency development and in academic achievement. Educators were also becoming more aware of the fact that ELs are not a homogeneous group, but rather they're subgroups of ELs with very different needs, including newcomers with interrupted formal education, newcomers who arrive with great appropriate skills in their native language, and students who are long-term English learners who've been classified as ELs for 6 or more years. In terms of how schools serve ELs, there's also been a trend over the last few years toward wanting to integrate ELs into general education classes as much as possible, and we'll talk more about that in the second half of my presentation. So now I want to get into some of the details of how school districts and communities serve newcomer students, and we'll start where the students start, which is with school enrollment. Many of you have probably heard some reports of civil rights violations in student enrollment over the last few years. In a 1982 Supreme Court case called Plyler versus Doe held that children who are unauthorized immigrants have a right to free public K-12 education. As a result, schools cannot ask about students' immigration status at registration because it's not relevant to whether students can enroll or not, and it can make parents feel that registering their children in school is unsafe. Some schools were also making the registration process difficult by preventing students from starting school if their families could not produce birth certificates or other documents that refugees and asylum seekers might not have. And finally, some districts were accused of inappropriately pushing older newcomers to alternative high schools or adult education. Now, in some cases, those are great programs that can serve older kids very well, but it's not appropriate to deny access to the regular high school program to eligible students if they want to go that route. In contrast, district staff that I spoke with emphasized the importance of a welcoming atmosphere for students coming to register either at a central office or in a school. In addition to ensuring that the registration process doesn't include any of the practices I just talked about, it's important to have staff who understand the community and can speak with parents in their language or at least have access to translators that can help with that process. Students who speak a language other than English at home will take an English language proficiency assessment when they register, but in addition, it can be beneficial to think about the intake process as looking at students' strengths, including what they know and can do in their native language. Even if students don't have transcripts, some districts are able to learn about a student's educational history through other means, such as interviewing the student and their family. And districts have also put into place a number of services that provide a comprehensive picture of a student's strengths and needs. And we'll hear a great example of that from Nicole in just a minute. Having a full picture of the student at the time of registration can help district and school staff explain to students and families what services are available so that they can all work together to make good decisions about placement in school and in classes. Especially for students who have a limited formal education, there's a lot they need to know about in order to adjust to life in middle or high school. Of course, they need to understand what behavior is expected of them in class and throughout the school day, but they may also need information about norms that might be obvious to American children, such as how to respectfully interact with teachers, or that copying from another student may be considered cheating. Some districts use ESL classes to weave in conversations about these kinds of topics. Another role that districts play is to be a hub for student services, including services offered by other municipal agencies or community-based organizations. For example, a district could set up a partnership with a community-based organization to provide mentorship to students that are particularly at risk of dropping out of school. Outside organizations often bring critically needed cultural and community knowledge to this work and can bring the experience of what has worked elsewhere. Over the last few years, schools and communities have been working particularly hard on expanding access to mental health care, given the great need for such services for young people that experience trauma in their country of origin or on their way to the U.S. There's been a particularly high demand for practitioners with the language and cultural skills to help students deal with past trauma and cultural adjustment, which affect their long-term well-being and also might get in the way of their academic success. Some districts have created programs to specifically help with issues related to family reunification as parents and children get used to new ways of interacting after a prolonged separation. Now, I have more to tell you from the report, but a little bit different from the way that we usually do these webinars. I'm now going to turn it over to Nicole to tell us a little bit about how LAUSD is supporting students in the Enrollment Placement and Assessment Center, and then I'm going to come back and tell you a little bit more about instructional programs. So, Nicole, we'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Here we go. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing at the district in regards to supporting our students and families, especially our immigrant students and families. So as part of Student Health and Human Services, the School Enrollment Placement and Assessment Center is one of the centers located in our district that really helps provide or takes a holistic approach on how to provide services to our families. When families come to the center, we focus on their physical wellness, their emotional wellness, and their social wellness. And this really helps kind of address some of the challenges that they might face being new to the country, new to the district, and really helping them navigate the school district and find out about the services and programs that are available throughout our district and in our community. Our goal really is to do an overall evaluation of our students and families and making sure that we provide them information and also giving them access to some of the resources that are available in our community. And then we also follow up with them to make sure that the enrollment process is smooth and that they're enrolled in school. So at the SEPA Center, we do mostly serve newcomers. Those are new to the country, new to the district, and our staff really assist them with the enrollment process. They provide families with information, and then we monitor how the family is doing and finding out have they enrolled in school. As most of you, if you are in the educational field, you know that when you come to enroll in school, there's a lot of paperwork. And so I have staff that are specifically there to help families fill out the paperwork because it could be daunting. A lot of families may not read or write in their language, and so we'll help them fill out the paperwork. When they come to our center, they fill out paperwork that includes not only the enrollment paperwork, but some of the paperwork that will help them get the services at the center. One of the things I wanted to touch upon is that we have affidavits for families who come with no documents, so you don't have to have those kind of documents like a birth certificate. We have an affidavit that they can use in lieu of those documents so that we don't stop the enrollment, and enrollment is immediate. So some of the services that we like to offer are health services. At the center, I have nurse practitioners and I have school nurses, and they do health screenings for students. Some who most have not been to seen a doctor or have had their health evaluated. So this is an opportunity for them to get that service. We provide immunizations, which are required for school. If they need a physical, we'll do that. We talk about nutrition, and we do referrals. If we find out that the student has any vision or audio or dental needs, we're able to do that with our partners. And we schedule those appointments for the families right away so that they can have access to that service. Being a part of a big district, we're very lucky to have school-based health clinics and wellness centers throughout the district, and we're able to refer families who need those services quickly to the areas, since we are a big district, to the areas where they can get that service if they're not going to come to our center for that service or resource. As well as providing medical assistance or resources for the families. We also can help them enroll in health insurance, and I have a specific staff that's there to help support them in either extending their Medi-Cal, reviewing their health enrollment documents, or helping them fill out those documents, and also following up with the families, especially with those students who have, especially for those students who have existing conditions and they need the support right away. In addition, we have a pupil service and attendance counselor. That's one of our counselors that's there 5 days a week, and they really help the family with school readiness and a wellness assessment to find out, what other social services or needs that the families have. Really looking at if they're new to the country, are they having any obstacles as far as what their journey was? Do we need to refer them to my other staff who does mental health service? And I'll talk about that in a second. And they look over their documentation, and they really try to give the family an idea of what's going to look like when they go to the school, and the key important people to talk to if there's any issues or concerns that the families have. They also meet with my psychiatric social worker, and the psychiatric social worker will do an assessment of the family to find out if they have any mental health questions, or they'll do education for the family. Sometimes we have, depending on the different cultures, they may not understand mental health, and we're able to give them that education. Maybe at the time when they come to our center, they may not need the resource right then, but we are able to provide them with that education. So if they need to, they can always come back to our center for more information, and we also give them the information where they can get access to mental health services at the school site. At the center, we really do a quick assessment because we don't see them. We help them enroll in school, so the center is not a place where they're going to be coming back regularly, so we can't do long-term kind of services, but we do connect them with either because we are a large district, we have psychiatric social workers in the school, or we also have outside partners who come onto the school who can provide mental health services, or we can also do a direct referral to some of the community organizations that we partner with so that the students and families can get access to that information. Once they meet with my staff regarding mental health services, then they'll move on to other staff that can help support them as well. One of the big issues that we've had, especially since 2014, is that there are a lot of students who need legal referrals, and so part of my job is to work with the outside organizations in the community to find out who's at capacity. We meet regularly, and we're able to do a direct referral to families so that we can make sure they don't we have something called notarios, and sometimes those are notary republics who say that they can practice legal services, but they really can't. We want to educate our families to go to pro bono legal services that are credible so that they can get the resources they need and have them assess their situation and find out if they're qualified for any relief. Some of the challenges that we've had, of course, and I know other districts may have it, is that the rhetoric that's going on right now about our immigrants and really getting them to get the services and know their rights and get that information so that people are informed about their rights and they can make appropriate decisions. Everyone, of course, is you know, in fear of deportation if that's their status, and so we wanted to really think about how can we support families and giving them information to help alleviate some of that fear. The capacity is always a problem with every service, and so really making key decisions and partners and continuing to partner so that we can make sure that the families have the services that they need. And in cultural consideration, family reunification, all those things come in and kind of can be a barrier as far as having the student be academically successful. So we try to help address some of those issues, you know, when they come in for services. So one of the things that LAUSD has done is that we want to really get the information out to families, and so we create a campaign. It's on our website. We put together this resource guide, which is here. If you go to our website, you'd be able to see some of the resources that we have there, but one of the key things that we try to tell families is that to really help alleviate some of the stress is to have a family preparedness plan. And if your district's out there that need support or don't know where to start, we welcome you to go to our website and use some of our resources so that you can share them with the families as well. Within the resource guide, we have know your health rights, know your legal rights, know your we're going to be adding housing rights in there because that's something that families have been asking about. And and just knowing your educational rights so that families really can educate themselves and make informed decisions. If you have any questions for me, this is my contact information. You know, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to support any school district or person who needs resources, and we'd be happy to help. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. And this is Julie again, and as I said, we're doing things a little differently. I am going to tell you a little bit more about the report, and then we're going to hear from Marguerite. So now I want to talk a little bit about program models used for secondary school-aged immigrant students. While some districts serve newcomers in all neighborhood high schools, some have set up centralized newcomer centers in one or more locations to serve these students. There's a number of different ways that these models can operate. We discussed some examples in our new paper that was released today, but I would also call your attention to a 2012 report from my former colleagues at Cal called Helping Newcomer Students Succeed in Secondary Schools and Beyond. And that report lays out these options really comprehensively. On this slide, I've listed some of the ways that these models can be organized. For example, they might be a standalone school that has its own administration, or they might be a strand within a larger comprehensive middle or high school. Some serve only students with interrupted formal education, while others serve all newcomers or all English learners. Some enroll students for just 1 to 4 semesters until they can transition to a general education program, perhaps changing schools in the process. While others keep students in the program until they graduate. And some newcomer centers offer classes in students' home languages, and others have instruction in English only. The decision to have a centralized newcomer program has to be weighed with possible benefits of serving students in any district high school in which they might enroll. Some of the things that districts consider include whether students in a central location will have access to the resources available to students at comprehensive high schools, like advanced coursework and electives and extracurricular activities, whether neighborhood schools can offer all of the additional supports that these students need, if neighborhood schools have the teacher capacity to support students in all of the content areas, what opportunities will English learners have to be integrated with non-ELs for instruction and extracurricular activities? What are the costs in terms of the time that students would spend traveling to a central location and the resources needed for transportation? And what issues might there be in attending one school and then switching to another? So as you can see, there's sort of pros and cons to each approach that have to be weighed. And finally, I want to talk about a trend that we've seen in U.S. high schools to, in a way, accelerate the curriculum for ELs. Some programs, especially those that are serving students with interrupted formal education, have students take ESL and remedial courses in their first year, which often don't count toward high school credit. These students then might not take more rigorous academic content until they've reached a certain level of English proficiency. This means that it might necessarily take them 5 or more years to graduate. Some of the concerns with this approach have come from research showing poor long-term outcomes when language is taught in isolation instead of integrated into age-appropriate content instruction. The disproportionate exclusion of ELs from advanced coursework later in their high school career, a lack of access to the same curriculum as their peers. Now, additionally, all states must include an accountability measure that shows how many students graduate in 4 years. So administrators can sometimes be wary of serving students that follow a course of study that's by necessity 5 or more years long. And lastly, schools do want to get older students through high school before they age out. Some high schools are trying new approaches to getting newcomer students through high school in 4 years. This approach can include creating new courses that satisfy state or district requirements to be offered for credit, figuring out how to embed additional English language development instruction into grade-level academic subjects, training general education teachers to shelter content instruction so that it's comprehensible to language learners, and supporting general education teachers in getting additional certifications in ESL or bilingual education, and having English learner specialists co-teach courses with general education teachers and or provide professional development and coaching to them. While there are some clear benefits to helping ELs get to high school graduation in 4 years, we definitely need more research on this approach. Some of the research questions that I think would be helpful for us to know are, what are English language proficiency and academic outcomes compared to the 5 or 6 year sequence? Are students well prepared for post-secondary education? Is this approach appropriate for all newcomers? And what are the necessary conditions for the approach to be effective?
Great. Thanks so much, Julie. So now it's a great pleasure to introduce Marguerite Lukes, who's the Director of Research and Innovation for the Internationals Network for Public Schools. I'm not sure if Internationals Network even needs much introduction to the group we've gathered here today, since for so many years they've really been a beacon for folks who are looking for effective practices for working with newly arrived students. So Marguerite, I'll hand it over to you so that you can share some of that amazing wealth of knowledge that's there within the Internationals Network.
Thank you so much, Margie. It's really a pleasure to be here. Migration Policy Institute is really one of our key go-to places for research and work on English language learners and immigrants in general. And I want to thank also Julie for your leadership on the Learning Network. It's really been a great resource for us as well. It's a pleasure to be here with you all, also representing our national work at Internationals Network. I want to talk, as I said, my name is Marguerite Lukes. I'm the Director of Research and Innovation. We're a national nonprofit school development and support organization, and what we do is we design, develop, and support programs for English learners to ensure that they have access to a quality education and really addressing some of those issues that Julie just laid out. The way we work is we partner with school districts to open public secondary schools and academies, which are school within a school programs, to really improve the overall success of ELs at the secondary level. The first international network school was started in 1985. In the meantime, we now have 27 schools, programs, and academies that serve over 9,000 students all over the country. Our work is based in research-based elements of second language development, of cognitive and social-emotional development, research on teacher learning, and instructional design. And we really use an innovative school-wide approach to ELL education. Our schools and academies create more options for recently arrived students who traditionally haven't been well served. We serve students who run the range of the students that Julie listed. Among our 9,000 students are students who are refugees, students who are unaccompanied minors, students from high poverty homes, both students who are both documented and undocumented, students with emergent literacy. It's a highly diverse group, and here's a map of the schools that we have. We also, in terms of the districts where we work also in traditionally immigrant-dense urban areas as well as in new growth districts that have only recently seen an influx of immigrants and that they're now struggling to serve. The work that we do is in response to a number of key dilemmas. And our work is also mentioned in the MPI report that is released today. The first dilemma that we address is really the preparation and support of teachers. We know there is a rapid increase in the ELL population. Very few teachers actually have the training and support to serve the ELLs in their classrooms successfully. So this is dilemma number one. The second dilemma that we address is instructional design. You see this image. This is unfortunately what you may see in many traditional classrooms serving ELLs around the country. Sadly, the norm disengaged students who are invisible and overlooked because the instruction simply does not reach them. The third dilemma is the dilemma of secondary school design. Teachers are isolated in their departments with walls between them and very few opportunities to actually communicate with each other and collaborate around students' needs. In our approach, we address two areas, structural elements and instructional elements. We redesigned school infrastructure with new schedules, changes in student placement and groupings, and teacher planning time to support interdisciplinary teams of teachers across the content areas. These teacher teams are responsible then for common heterogeneous cohorts of students. And this differs from approaches that are common in many districts across the U.S. in which ESL teachers and reading specialists are often the sole responsible parties for English language learners. And the way we work is we break down the barriers between classes that are leveled by proficiency, between departments, between ESL and content teachers, and we also redesign instruction. Teachers who work together across their content areas differentiate, they scaffold, they integrate language development into every lesson across the content areas so students are learning English and content at the same time. And this is true for all teachers. So teachers are also able, because they share a cohort of students, to get to know their students. And there is no more of what we saw in that earlier picture, that disappearing into the back row of the class with the head on the desk in despair. Students are really engaged in hands-on instruction with engaging real-world projects that are relevant for their age and grade level. So what does this actually look like? Here's a few images. Instructionally, these teams of teachers, which includes art and PE and elective teachers, all design their instruction with language development in mind. So it's collaborative and hands-on. There's scaffolds, there's visuals, there's multiple points of entry, there's text at varying levels, and teachers work differently. Because they work as a team, there's ongoing professional learning within the team and across the network. Because we have 27 sites and folks learn from each other and there's an exchange of information and resources, so teachers can deepen their knowledge of the linguistic demands of their disciplines, and they incorporate an array of ways for students to demonstrate what they have learned. So interdisciplinary teams share a cohort to travel to their classes together, and during the time that students have lunch or electives, teachers can meet together in common planning time so they can align their instruction and really maximize learning and support students in their social emotional development as well. And there's no more of the sink or swim approach that we have seen, unfortunately, for too many years serving English language learners. Students are encouraged, not just allowed, but really encouraged to use their home language to make meaning and to help others, while English is used as the medium of instruction and students have opportunities to read, write, and present to their peers in English. But in our case, the linguistic diversity of the student population is not a cause for remediation, but it's really a cause for celebration. So the students in DTRAC classes represent a mix of language and academic proficiency, and the magic of this heterogeneity and the integration of home language supports makes it that everyone belongs, because small groups of students work together on projects. There is no disappearing into the silence. There's more student talk, there's more engagement, and more problem solving, and you see that in these images, these active students. So, and what we see, and we have had so much success, this is just a little snapshot of some data. The 4-year graduation rate, the 6-year graduation rate, which we report in New York State, is just so much more successful for students within our network. We see fewer dropouts, we see more college graduates, we see better attendance. So we're very proud that our network is growing and that teachers are actively engaged in developing resources and sharing with each other. So if you have additional questions or interested in our resources or more about our work, here is our contact information. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Marguerite, and also Nicole and Julie. And Marguerite, I know that the type was kind of small on your intro slide, so I just want to point out that you also recently published a book on Latino immigrant youth and interrupted schooling, which I think might be of interest to a lot of folks. So that you've got that separate life there.
Yes.
As an author, in addition to all the work with internationals. So thanks to everyone who's been sending in questions. Keep them coming. I think I'll start, first of all, Nicole, with one for you, which was, how is all the valuable information that's been collected by SEPA transferred to school? And is there any ongoing collaboration between the schools where students wind up and the student support staff?
So yes, we do share all of this information. So number one, because I'm part of Student Health and Human Services, our district, that department has access to all the counselors who actually work in the school. So within that district, we have school mental health, we have pupil services, we have medical services, wellness programs. So my program, we're all under that branch, and so I've presented to the district on our resources. We have at each local district, because we do have 6 of them within the larger district, and at each one we have the Centers for Education and Immigration Resources. At each local district we have staff that has access to this information, so if families were to go to the local district and ask about that or call or have questions, they could go and get the information that we have for families. The other part of the question, can you repeat it for me so I can make sure I can answer it?
It was just, what's the ongoing support then? The first part of it was, what do you do with the information you've collected? And the second part was, what's the access to ongoing student support services?
So access for us is to continue to put the message out there as far as, so the We Are One Standing with Immigrant Families campaign really was launched here. I think it was about looking at imagery. We came up with an image that we developed with our students and parents to really tell them that schools are a safe place, and we've put information out there so families can come to schools to get access to that information. We're also doing training. We've worked with training to put together PowerPoints for our administrators and the school staff so that on how they can share information with families. In addition, we're going to be doing workshops on Know Your Rights. We've worked with our community partners to come together to put together a curated workshop with different topics such as know your housing rights, know your legal rights, know your health rights, and we wanted everyone in the whole district to get the same message, so our legal partners and the other partners put together information that's really so that families could understand it in a very easy manner, and we've put that together, and we're going to start doing forums for families. We've been doing this work for some time, but this campaign and our board resolutions that we've passed have really helped us elevate this work and be able to really share this information with our families. So it's ongoing because, as you know, things are changing all the time, and we want to make sure that we're being responsive, and from the information that families need, we're putting it out there for them.
Great. Thanks so much, Nicole. So, Julie, there's a set of questions that have come in that have to do with at the top end, I guess, of the age band. You know, a number of folks who are saying, well, you know, what if you've got someone who's already 18, wants to enroll in high school? So they're partly questions about the upper age band, but then also I think the dilemma that we know a lot of the districts who were in the Learning Network talked about with, you know, sort of how realistic is it for some students, even if the school does a fantastic job and the kid does a fantastic job, that they'll actually be able to get a high school diploma, you know, in the short amount of time that some of them have. So do you just want to talk a little bit about how some of the districts have thought about that?
Sure, those are great questions. And the short answer to the first part is it depends. My very favorite answer, and the one I give most often, because who can, obviously in all states, students must be enrolled in the K-12 system if they are under the age of compulsory school age. So if students have to go to school up to 18, then obviously they have to enroll them. But yeah, then the question is what happens to those kids who are older than that but younger than the age, like 20 or 21, that they could be enrolled. And again, the short answer is different states have different requirements and different levels of specificity in their requirements. So some lay out very clearly who can enroll and when, and some really kind of leave it up to the district, and so districts have more leeway in terms of the policies. And again, where there's that flexibility, in New York City, for example, there's an alternative high school that is in District 79, or not just one high school, but a whole set of high schools called Pathways to Graduation, and that is certainly a great option. You know, it's not denying access to anybody to put them in a program that gives them specific services that will help them to get to a high school diploma, even if it's not in a comprehensive high school. But as folks have said, it is definitely a dilemma, and that is one of the things I didn't talk about today that is more in the report, that districts have really been struggling because sometimes students come to them and say, like, actually, I just want some ESL classes. Can I do that in the free K-12 system? And maybe that's not a possibility. Or students say, I'm 19 and I'd really like to enroll and it's allowed. And, you know, how can the districts talk to students? I think, you know, again, just briefly, the way to look at this is to look at the individual needs of that student. Would that student be well served, who is, you know, over 18, but could enroll but probably wouldn't finish in time? Would that student benefit from what they could get out of a comprehensive high school as compared to what the other alternatives are? You always have to consider that as well. If the adult ed or continuing education would not be well placed to help that person develop any, you know, ESL or, you know, whatever those skills are, you have to consider where is the best person for that, where's the best place for that person to receive something that can help them to achieve their goals.
Great, thanks, Julie. you know, for folks who have more sort of detailed questions around that, we can talk post the webinar. So there's a number of questions here. I think maybe Marguerite, I'll send this one to you since the Internationals Network operates in a few different states or school districts. But there's a number of questions about how to communicate to students that it's safe to enroll. And, you know, this isn't just an issue for unauthorized kids who are from unauthorized families, but from across the spectrum. And I know, you know, my sense of it was that for a lot of school districts in the beginning, when after the Trump administration came into office and there were concerns about in immigrant and refugee communities about increasing deportations and the like, that in many school districts they thought, well, you know, everyone knows that it's against the law to not enroll kids who, you know, regardless of their background. Right. And so I think there, you know, in a lot of places there wasn't the thought that you needed to really communicate that to families. But a number of the folks who are writing in are saying that they think that some of the declines in their EL students that they're seeing are due to fear. So just from looking across some of the places that international schools operate, do you want to say a little bit about what you think, how they're coping with the current environment?
Yeah, absolutely. And we hear from all of our schools and programs that students and their families are afraid. There is a palpable fear, and this is, you know, conversations constantly in school since last November, so it is real. The reality of our schools, too, is that they function in partnership with so many community-based organizations. So really the safety, both the legal safety, the emotional safety, the physical safety of our students is ensured through partnerships with nonprofits in the community, and part of helping students feel safe and being able to navigate the current environment is working with those folks and getting the word out and doing public forums and, you know, talking to the imam in the mosque and bringing people into the school to talk to the kids and having forums for parents. And some of the things also that Nicole was alluding to, but it's really getting the information out through the administrators, to the teachers, to the families, listening to the students. I feel like the school culture that gets created in a community that is really intentional in our schools around students being safe and being welcomed. They know they can come in and ask questions and express their fear and ask for help. So our guidance and social work staff are really key. We have someone on staff here who's a key colleague who provides resources to those folks throughout the network and works with them to figure out how do we, you know, what kind of supports can really bolster what we're doing. So that's important. And I would also add, it's not an add-on. You know, we talk about academic. I mean, and you're alluding to that. I think the question indicates that as well. We test for academic development, we test for linguistic development, but really the feeling of safety and the social emotional development of our students is key to those things being possible and to them being successful. So being able to partner and have these resources to ensure that they can know what to do and where to go and how to be supported is really tantamount to their success.
Great, thanks, Marguerite. So, Julie, we have a cluster of questions related to funding, and I guess I would say, you know, to all of you who have written in about issues related to funding, that was one of our top questions, you know, in starting the Learning Network, that we really did want to find out more about what the costs were that schools were facing, how are they meeting them, and, you know, trying to think of ways that it might be possible to make the additional support that schools needed more visible, in a sense, to both immigration policymakers and to education policymakers. And I would say I should pass it to Julie pretty quickly because she's already immersed herself in this kind of tangled world of how do you figure out where funding comes from, given how different a lot of the state funding streams are and their supplemental funding streams are. But maybe, Julie, could you take a whack at just what's your sense of how schools are finding funding for doing this, and then, you know, how can folks maybe connect to resources that are able to talk more about funding issues more broadly?
Sure, and this is had you phrased that a different way, I could have used my "it depends" answer again. As you said, it is really different in different states. Most states do provide a higher level of state funding for students who are English learners. So that money that's coming into districts in sort of their big pot of funding that comes from the state, that money really should be going to serving the needs of English learners. And, you know, it's hard to say, it's hard to sort of divide up that money, because the more, so many of our schools are under-resourced right now, and the more resources a school has overall, the better they can serve ELs, and the more they can use this, the extra sources of funding for things that are truly extra and helpful. Some folks on the line might not be familiar with the federal funding for English learners, which comes under Title III of the Every Student Succeeds Act. It has in the past been funded at about almost $740 million each year, and that is divvied out to the states. So you would want to look into how Title III spending is, how districts and schools are spending their Title III money. And I think the partnership with other organizations goes hand in hand with creating these other opportunities for funding, because a lot of these, a lot of organizations, community-based organizations, are already really familiar with fundraising, especially with local philanthropy, folks that are, you know, maybe smaller donors than you would see in the national news, but are really interested. And we've seen over the last year or so, a lot of funders are very interested in helping out this population. There's been a lot of attention to it, and obviously a lot about immigration in the news, and so getting the word out that some of these services could be extremely beneficial might be something that local philanthropy is interested in. There are various resources online if you Google for looking for, you know, searching for philanthropic groups in your area. And so, yeah, again, partnering with other community-based organizations, certainly, you know, working, if there are multiple districts in a city, having those districts try to get together and talk to each other about how to, what resources they've found, and how to maybe share some ideas and share some expertise, so that you can maybe trade one person who knows, who can give a professional development to the other district, and then trade instead of having to pay for it. So there's a variety of really creative things that school districts have done in order to be able to support these services and these students.
Great, and then I'll just throw in quickly that there is a small pot of money from ORR. I don't think you mentioned that, Julie, right. The Refugee School Impact Grants. And California just recently included, I think it was $5 million in the budget, $10 million that they just agreed to about a month ago. And so we hear that money should be coming out in the spring. So, you know, obviously if you don't live in California, that's not a potential help to you, but it's also something that you could consider thinking about whether it's something that, you know, that your state might be interested in doing. There is a fair amount of, I would say, knowledge within the refugee resettlement field because of those grants being available. They were, you know, I would say that they, over the years, have leveraged other investments as opposed to sort of being the sole way that that different school districts around the country stood up programs for late arriving students. But, you know, there's certainly a lot to be learned from the experience related to those. So, Nicole, I want to send two questions to you, just combine them. One was, I believe it was you had mentioned collecting affidavits for students who don't have all their kind of proper documents for entry into the school. So the question was sort of how do you go about doing that, you know, and then another was, I think that maybe it's one you could answer, just if you have older students with particularly large gaps in their education, you know, does the district have schools that specialize in that, or are there particular placements that you make for those kinds of students? Because obviously, you know, it's hard enough for school districts to help older kids be able to get onto grade level quickly when they don't have the underlying English language literacy skills, but then if they also have major gaps in their formal education, it's yet another, you know, in a sense, different approach that's needed to be supporting their education.
Yes, so as far as the affidavits, that's in our policy. So it's part of our attendance manual, and so those are used for any, you know, throughout the school district, any staff can access those when families don't come up with that information. You know, it's a public document. I can definitely share those affidavits. It's something that you just need to put in policy as far as whoever is creating your policy around attendance and enrollment and registration. So that's the way you could go about with that. And then as far as the older students, so the way that, well, all the different school districts and different states have different ed code, but for our ed code, students, of course, under 18, it's compulsory, you know, mandatory that they enroll. So we do enroll them in the schools. We have different schools in different areas, but we have a pretty diverse, multicultural, multi-language department within our district that kind of helps with that, determine like where the students are as far as their skills, and then places them in the appropriate classes. The other bad, unfortunate part is that because we are such a large school district, we, you know, we don't have the resources to have special schools. I think we did back a couple of years ago, but now we really have, you know, each school is able to support families within the school, and we actually have gotten a couple of coaches in our schools that have the highest immigrant or newcomers, which is have been here less than 3 years, brand new to the country, and we're providing additional support through, I think it's Title III, where there's coaches or counselors that are going to focus on that population and help them, you know, get access to the information that they need and also be successful at the school site.
Great, great. So, so given the time, I think I just want to say we've gotten so many terrific questions. We haven't been able to get to all of them. We'll do our best to get back to those of you whose questions haven't been answered as part of this Q&A. But I want to say too that, you know, we're very interested in. You should, I guess I would say, folks should feel free to reach out to us directly. The Learning Network was working both with some of the traditional destination cities and districts, but also districts where this was an entirely new phenomenon for them to be receiving late arriving kids. And so there's a lot of granularity to what districts did, you know, different approaches, how they went about solving different problems that they were facing. And so there's a lot of learning here that we'd be in a position to share. So please feel free to be in touch if you're thinking about how to use the report and to figure out how to build solutions or solve problems where it is that you're working. You'll see here again, just how you can find this on our website. I'd like to say too that we have another webinar coming up next Monday at noon, which is focused on the National Academy of Sciences and a report that came out a while back. And so you see the information there. You can just go to our events page in order to connect and sign up for that. And then I just want to say a huge thank you to Marguerite and Nicole for all the fantastic work that you do, and also for taking time out to join us today. Julie and I are so honored and pleased that you were able to join us, and to everyone who was on the line, we're happy to be a resource however we can be for the work that you're doing and that you're trying to move forward. Thanks again for joining, and we hope to stay in touch. Bye-bye.